Good afternoon and welcome to today's meeting of the Children, Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Due to the current situation, this meeting is taking place virtually, with members of the committee, along with the officers presenting reports, joining online. Can I please ask that all members and officers have their microphone on mute until they wish or are invited to speak. When you are speaking, please also turn your video on. Can I now ask members to introduce themselves? I have not received any apologies. Mrs. Wright.
Hello, Councillor Maggie Wright, Stony Stanton and Croft Division.
Thank you. And Mrs. Wright is also the Deputy Chair of this meeting. Dr. Feltham.
Hello there, Chairman. Yes, I represent the Gartree Division.
Dr. Bremner.
Hello, good afternoon, Chair. I represent Mark Harbour, West and Foxton.
Mr. Parton.
Good afternoon. I represent Loughborough South Division. Thank you.
Mr. Osborne.
Good afternoon, Chair. I represent Rothley and Mount Sorrel.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm one of the county councillors that represent Oadby, one of the two.
Mr. Welsh.
Good afternoon, County Councillor Jeff Welsh. I represent Glaby and Glenparva Division.
Mr. Sheehan.
Hi, Sean Sheehan, Forest and Measham Division.
Thank you. And Canon Carolyn Lewis.
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. I represent the Anglican Diocese. Thank you.
Thank you. And I am Hilary Fryer and I represent Quorn and Barrow and I am the Chair of this committee. Thank you. We now move on to the agenda items. Item 1, the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of November. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of November 2020 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everyone in agreement?
Agreed.
Agreed.
I have item 2 is question time. I have received 2 questions from members of the public, Mrs. Sue Whiting and Mrs. Gillian Bowers, both of whom are present in the meeting. Can I ask you both to remain on mute until you are asking your supplementary question? Both questions and responses have been circulated to the members of the committee just prior to the start of the meeting and will be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussions is to be held on these questions. I will first invite Mrs. Whiting to ask a supplementary question if you have one. I would remind you that your supplementary question should be to clarify the reply you have been given and should not raise any new issues. Can I confirm that everybody can see and hear Mrs. Whiting? Mrs. Whiting, are you with us?
I am, yes.
Thank you. If you'd like to ask your supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, for the answer given, which I would like some further clarification. A, which fonts were used to produce the written statement of action submitted to Ofsted? B, which fonts were used for the SEN handbook? C, which fonts were used for the local offer newsletter sent out in December 2020? And D, which fonts are used for standard format documents?
Thank you very much, Mrs. Whiting. I will now ask the officers whether they are able to respond.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everybody. We will take those questions away and ensure that a response goes back to Mrs. Whiting as soon as is possible. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome to stay, Mrs. Whiting, should you wish to, for the rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
I then have Mrs. Bowers.
Hello. Hi.
Do you have a supplementary question, Mrs.
I
Bowers?
do. It's a very short one. I'd just like to thank you, Chair, for your response to my initial question. I just would like to know if it would be possible to include the figures that have now been provided in future reports, because it does give some really useful context, I think.
Yeah. Did you want to come back on that?
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mrs. Bowers. We can look at including those in future reports. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Bowers, you also are entitled and welcome to stay if you wish for the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Right. And item 3 on the agenda, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions. Item 4, any other items which Chairman has decided to be urgent elsewhere on the agenda. In addition to those, I have not received any urgent items. Declarations of interest on items on the agenda. Does any member have any interest they wish to declare? No. 6, declarations of the party whip in accordance with Overview and Scrutiny Procedure Rule 16. Do members have any declarations? No. Presentation of petitions under Standing Order 36. There are no petitions. We are now moving on to the main agenda items. As with all following items, can I ask that you keep your microphones on mute until you ask? And to indicate that you have a question, please unmute your microphone. Now we'll call you. And can you use the hand signal, the raise hand system, so that we can take you in order of questions? Thank you very much. Right. The first item on today's agenda is the medium-term financial strategy 2021 to 22 and 2024-25. And I will call on the Director of Children and Families and Mrs. Jane Moore. Members should have received a copy of the process it's suggested if dealing with the budget. We will discuss each section in turn, and there will then be an opportunity for members to ask questions on that particular area of the report. Jane Moore, Director of the Children and Family Services, will present the report. Also attending are Sarah Bricknell and Jenny Lawrence from Corporate Resources, who are here to assist in answering any questions. I will invite the Director to briefly introduce the report before we scrutinise the proposals as per the process set out on the paper that has been circulated. Thank you. So we will now move on to this item. Jane Moore, would you like to take over? And we're doing it, as we said, in order. And we will take the questions after each section. So the first one we're looking at is service transformation, paragraphs 7 to 8 on page 14.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides information on the proposed 2021 to 25 medium-term financial strategy as it relates to the Children and Family Services Department. I'll go through each section as indicated. So if I can start with the service transformation section. So the department is currently embarking on a number of significant programmes of transformation across all of its core services, with a view to ensuring that we've got a cost-effective operating model whilst improving outcomes for our children and young people across Leicestershire. So we've got 4 main extensive programmes. The first one is the High Needs Development Programme, which is focused on plans for special educational needs and disability services, and includes the development of new provision for children and young people with SEN, but also a review of systems and processes to deliver those improved services. The second programme is the Defining Children and Family Services for the Future, and I don't intend to go through that in detail in this paper because members will be aware we have a separate paper on this item next on the agenda. The third programme is the Children's Innovation Partnership, which we're undertaking in partnership with Bernardo's, and that's looking at alternative service delivery models to improve the sufficiency and quality of residential provision. And the final programme is the Departmental Efficiencies, and this is the work that we're undertaking to identify and deliver further efficiencies within services over and above those that are identified in the above 3 programmes. Just before I stop for questions, I'll go through I'll pause there. I'd forgotten where I was pausing. Thank you, Chair. I'll pause there.
It's always a bit complicated when we're all remote. Right, I'll invite questions now to this first part, the service transformation. Can I see any hands, please? Gemma, I might ask you at times if can you use that raise hand system I have.
Yes, I think Mr. Parton asked a question.
Mr. Parton.
Thank you very much. In the page 16, sorry,
Mr. Parton, we're not gone on to page 16 yet. We're on page 14 and 15.
I'll wait then.
Oh no, am I right there? Paragraph,
yes, that's right, Chair. I've not covered those yet.
Paragraph 7 to 8 on page 14. So Ted, hold if Mr. Parton, if you could just hold fire for the next section, then we'll come back to you.
Well, I did actually have a question on 14 as well, if I may.
Yes, if you may.
Thank you. The at point 8, the Children's Innovation Partnership, in partnership with Bernardo's, agreed capital investment of up to £2.5 million to create up to 12 placements. That would appear, it would seem to be quite a vague statement because it said up to 2.5 million to create up to 12 placements. What actually is that's a significant amount of capital. What actually specifically do we know so far?
It is, yeah, I can go into more detail later on that if you want in the savings section. The reason it reads up to is that we identified the need for some essential homes for children across Leicestershire, and the first phase of the Children's Innovation Partnership residential brief has identified the need for an investment of up to 2.5 million in order to purchase or build properties that we would use to either place young people in or use as an assessment beds.
Right, again, we're just talking paragraphs 7 to 8. Dr. Bremner.
Thank you, Jane. I'd just like to ask about the Bernardo's initiative. Obviously something quite new, something that hopefully will impact children very positively. Could you just perhaps flesh out a little bit more about your vision for that and its practical expression as it meets children's needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So we came into partnership with Bernardo's back in 2018, and as we've put on that bullet, we're calling it the Children's Innovation Partnership. And it was specifically set up for us to work alongside a partner to improve outcomes for children across Leicestershire. And the way that we're running it is through the development of a number of different design briefs, and the first of which is what we're calling the residential design brief, which we make reference to here. And so the premise or the whole idea of the partnership is to work alongside Bernardo's to improve outcomes for children. And we're doing that through the development of a number of different initiatives. And members will recall we've brought a paper to kind of set out some of the work we've done across the partnership so far. And the majority of it has so far been around pulling in money into the department to develop a number of different programmes, including family group conferencing, some work we did across the summer holidays as well. What this paper refers to is the residential design brief, which is particularly focused on improving the sufficiency, so number of places, and the quality of residential provision across Leicestershire. So it was a specific brief that was looking at the number of children that we currently have in residential provision, and indeed what that provision ought to look like or could be improved to look like. So the reason it's appearing within the MTFS is that not only are we investing in capital, so we've put in 2.5 million in order to purchase a number of properties, but we also are projecting that there will be some savings as a result of this, because the cost, the placement cost for individual children will be lower than that we're paying at the moment. So not only will it be good for children, because we're going to develop some really good quality provision for them, but equally it will also save us some money because our unit costs will be lower.
Okay, so win-win, reduced cost, better outcomes for children.
Absolutely.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. It's on the same item. I think this is a good idea, and I do welcome it and I do support it. But I do think somebody at least should make the point that this is a complete turnaround. It's almost like reinventing the wheel again. We're turning around. It's not so long ago that the county council got rid of every single county council children's home or facility, and it was a political decision to outsource everything to the private sector. I have to say I was unhappy with that. I think since I've been on the county council, I think the last 2 children's homes have closed, but it was all in the obviously it was to do what was best for people thought was best for the children and to save money. But it really has come full circle again, hasn't it, that we're now deciding that it's better for children to work with somebody like Dr. Bernardo's, and we can actually save money. But so it really has to be noted that this is a complete turnaround of this private enterprise does everything. But I do welcome this, and it sounds a good idea to me.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, I think that the significant difference is that the local authority isn't looking to open and run homes themselves, and that we are looking at developing a very different kind of residential provision for children based on a really good understanding of what those young people's needs are, and indeed where some of our pressures are. So it's about how we build the market most effectively. Part of our strategy does continue to include working with the private sector. So we've done a lot of work to work with our local private providers to ensure that there is a whole range of provision for our children that we have responsibility for. But included in it, as you've set out, Mr. Kaufman, we are looking at developing more provision, and we're doing that through Bernardo's as our delivery partner, rather than ourselves running them as a county council.
Thank you. We now move on to the next part, which is on the MTFS, which is the proposed revenue budget, other changes and transfers. So we're now looking at paragraphs 9 to 15, pages 15 and 16, and Appendix A, which is page 35 to 36. Mr. Kaufman, you still have your hand up, which I don't mind unless you're already presuming a question. Mr. Sheehan is poised, ready. So can I ask Jane Moore to go through this for us, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So if I start at the top of page 15, the table that you've got in front of you sets out the proposed revenue budget for 21-22 through to 24-25. And it is detailed in Appendix A in greater detail. Just to note, the line for where it reads additional proposed growth, which is also noted in Appendix B, which I'll come on to, is set out in Appendix B as a cumulative growth, whereas what we've got in this table is the growth that is being required by the department year on year. If I just move down to paragraph 12, that's where we've set out the total net budget. But just to note, the total gross budget for 2021 is 338 million, and that does include contributions from various specific grants, which are detailed later in this paper, transferred and transfers and other contributions. But the total net budget for the department totals 89.1 million, and we've broken down in that table how the department spends the budget, the net budget. I don't propose to go into any more detail around other changes and transfers. Do you want me to pause there, Chair, or do you want me to move on to growth?
I think if you could, this would probably help if you went to growth, because I think it is linked. And then I will take the questions.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of growth, what we've set out is the required growth over the next 4 years for the department, and it currently totals 23.1 million, and that includes 10 million in 21-22. The majority of the growth that we're projecting within the department relates to increases in demand, but also in increases in complexity of needs of children. And all of that culminates in the need for more staff, but also increased placement costs as well. So if I just go through a little bit of detail on each line, the first line is around the growth of social care placements. There's been a trend over a number of years of a demographic growth in children's social care, and that's led to the need for an increase in placements of children in our care. On top of that, we've also seen an increase in the average unit cost of children as well. So what the growth includes is 3 million growth that was originally provided within the MTFS, and that has now risen, that is going to rise to 9 million by 23-24. We are currently projecting a 2.9 million overspend on this year's budget in terms of our children in care placements, and that has resulted in an increase in the growth required, both to address this year's shortfall as well as supporting the increased growth for future years. As I said, the primary driver for those increased costs is that increase in the average unit cost, and we've detailed it there around the average placement cost for those children in residential provision from £3,500 to £4,000 per placement, and the 16 plus placement increase of £1,000 to £1,400 per week. We've also seen a number of changes in case law and court-directed orders as well. So one of the significant pressures in the department is that there has been an increase in demand or court-ordered placements for baby and parents together, where the courts are telling us to make placements to keep parent and babies together whilst we undertake an assessment. And then there are some other potential market pressures, such as the impact of COVID, which could have an impact on increased costs. But it's really difficult for us to kind of attribute individual factors as single causes for those increases. And obviously, as we've talked about, and we'll talk a little bit in more detail, the Defining Children's Services Programme and the Children's Innovation Partnership are both set up to work towards the reduction in that growth. The next growth line is our frontline social care staff. We need to make additional investment in frontline social care staff in order to ensure that our case levels remain manageable and we're able to meet our statutory duties. We did include the growth of social workers in last year's MTFS, but over this year it's become apparent that not only is there an increased demand, but we do need to ensure that there's sufficient infrastructure around those social workers in order for them to be able to do their jobs effectively. And obviously, whilst our recruitment to permanent posts is going well, we are still using agency staff and will continue to do so. And obviously, COVID is having an impact on some of our ability to achieve permanent recruitment, although we have been successful. G3 is our social care market premia. This does remain unchanged from the previous MTFS, other than that we've extended it. G4 is our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and you'll note that we have reduced the growth requirement in this area. There was 750,000 over the 3 years for unaccompanied asylum seekers. Levels of demand and costs have been largely contained in this area. The Home Office has increased funding rates, and there is still a risk, because obviously we don't have any control over this if children arrive and we need to look after them. But we are confident at the moment that the growth that's required can reduce down to £50,000 per year. And then the other two areas of growth are one in our school place planning area, where we are projecting a growth of 240,000 there. So that team's responsible for the planning and delivery of school places. And in the short term, this service has been supported by using a specific reserve grant, which is now depleted, and our basic need funding has decreased. We need this team in order to deliver the school accommodation programme and growth programme that we've got over the next few years, and also to deliver the Section 106 contribution work. We are looking at whether or not we can fund this through another means, but at the moment this is an identified area of growth. And then the final area of growth is around the increased demand for legal costs. This budget has been under significant pressure for a number of years, and partly as a result of the increase in the number of care proceedings that are lodged with the court. And this has resulted in a current in-year forecast of 0.4 million overspend, and this is reflected therefore in the growth going forward. There's no indication that this level of demand is going to reduce anytime soon, and that's why we've put the growth bid in. So I'll pause there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, I have 4 people wishing to speak or ask questions. Mr. Sheehan, and then Mr. Parton, and Mr. Welsh, and Mrs. White.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is on growth. I'm looking here. The table at paragraph 9 on page 15, which is supplemented by Appendix B on page 37. I'm interested there in the pattern of growth, particularly in G1 and G2. I note the fact that those figures are cumulative, but it does show that we see growth in G1 of 6.3 million in 21-22, but then it only goes up by 3.3 million in 22-23, and similar sort of increments in the following 2 years, and a similar pattern with a large increase in 21-22 in G2, and then much smaller increases in the following 3 years. I hear what Jane was saying about infrastructure. Perhaps you could explain that a little bit more and just help me understand why we've got a large jump in growth in both those items and much smaller increases in the ensuing years.
Yeah, so if I take the first one, which is the demographic growth in social care placements. So yes, as Mr. Sheehan's pointed out, there's a large growth requirement in 2021, so next year, and then less of a requirement in the future years. The increased growth requirement in 21-22 is as a result of the projected overspend this year. So as I set out, we are currently projecting quite a significant overspend within our placements budget this year. That's primarily as a result of the increased unit cost of children that we hadn't built in to the growth in previous years, and therefore wasn't reflected adequately within the budget this year. So the 21-22 costs include the kind of levelling up of the budget for 21-22 to include the overspend. And it also includes the growth that we're projecting within 21-22 around increased unit costs and the increase of children coming in. And then in the subsequent years of the MTFS, the growth that is reflected in it is the increased unit cost and increase of children, numbers of children coming into our care. In terms of the growth, how the growth is apportioned across G2, that it's a similar factor really around levelling up for 21-22. So what G2 21-22 includes is we've re-looked at two things this year. One is the infrastructure around our social workers to ensure that we have enough managers and other staff to support social workers to do their business, as well as looking at the demand this year and ensuring that we have enough social workers and frontline staff to work with those children and young people. So we've included that in the 21-22 forecasts, and then the subsequent years are around us ensuring that we have enough social workers or social care staff to support the demand that we've then projected over the subsequent years.
Can I ask a supplementary on that?
Yes, I did. In fact, you may certainly, Mr. Chair, but I do have 3 other people as well, but you're supplementary.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned the unit cost, the 40% increase. I mean, if that was inflation, you'd be calling it runaway inflation. I just wondered how you can be confident that your budget projections see that being brought under control, and generally, how confident are you that your budget projections in future years won't see a repeat of this year with an overspend?
In terms of the first question, we have based our budget projections on what we think the unit costs will be. We don't have any control over the either increase in unit costs or the costs of the provision, because obviously we pay out for placement, so it's not a cost that we manage internally. So what we've done is we've had a look at the unit cost increase over the last few years and looked at what we think that's going to be over the future years, and then we've budgeted accordingly. And we've done the same in terms of projecting the numbers that we think will come into our care and require different types of provision. So all of those calculations are done with our finance partners, but also our social care staff who understand our children and are able to think through certainly what the pattern's previously been and what we think the pattern will be. So we have projected on the best of our knowledge what we think the patterns will be, but it's not definite, as in we are unable to control the number of children that come in, and also there are a number of other variables. So I'm confident it's as good as we're going to get it based on what we currently know, what's happened in the past and what we know is happening this year.
Yeah, just a final comment. I am concerned that you don't appear to have any control over unit costs. That does worry me.
It's not a cost that we set out. It's a cost that is given to us by the providers of placements. So when we have a child that requires a placement, we go out to the market to have a look at who can best look after that child for us. And obviously those costs are then given to us by the provider market. The work that we're doing within the Children's Innovation Partnership around the residential design brief is specifically looking at how we can bring some of that control back in to not only ensure that we've got good provision for our children, but we're managing some of those costs as well.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Parton.
Thank you. I would have thought, leading on from that point, because that was actually my question as well, that should we build capacity, that should the aspiration would be that it would drive or at least hold costs down in the private sector. similar to how supermarkets operate on their price. I'm interested in the legal costs. How you mentioned this subject twice, and rereading these paragraphs, it seems that we can deduce the reason the amount we're spending in this particular area is increasing purely mainly because the word used here is experts will now refuse to take legal aid funded work unless the local authority will meet the balance. It would seem that this is something we can't really control. So and the growth provides for an extra 2 cases per month. So can we say that the main reason is this change around legal aid? And that's what's really impacting the issue here, or are there other issues I've not understood?
No, I think you've understood it. The reasons, I think we've set them out in that paragraph. So there are a number of reasons. One is a very simple demand issue, so there just are more cases to deal with. But as we've put out in the bullets, there are a number of other aggravating issues that are causing some significant pressure on the case costs, and we've detailed those in the bullets. So I think there isn't one single reason for the increase in the costs around our legal pressures, but we've outlined them in the report in terms of what some of those what those pressures are.
And really, because of that, whereas the previous issue that Mr. Sheehan and I've just mentioned, that's something that's in our control to maybe bring under to address through building our own capacity. This seems like something that we have pretty much no control over.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. So just going back to the first one around the building, you're right, part of our strategy in the Children's Innovation Partnership is about building local provision, and we're using the same strategy within our SEND improvement around how we can build local provision, which means that it will be of good quality, but also we can control the cost more. We will still need to work with the private sector, and part of our strategy is around how we work best with the private sector to provide good placements for our children. But yes, this in terms of the legal costs, a lot of it is out of our control.
Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. I understand all of the costs that are associated with growth, but I wonder whether you could just highlight for members what you think, what's the fundamental, or what are the reasons that give rise to growing demand? Not the costs associated, but why in society, what's happening that's creating these complex sort of growth in cases? Thank you.
I think there are a number of issues, Mr. Welsh. I mean, one of the very simple ones is that there are more children. So we do have a demographic increase in number of children for whom we have responsibility. Another key factor for the department is that there has been a change over the years around what the things that we are responsible for. So we now have a much broader span of responsibility in terms of children than we had, say, 5-10 years ago. And the example I would give is that we are now seeing far more older teenagers, so 15, 16-year-old, quite complex children that we're having to rightly take into our care because they are at significant risk. And that could be of things like criminal exploitation or sexual exploitation. And so we're seeing rising demand for our services where we are taking responsibility rightly for those children for whom need our support. So there's a kind of changing complexity of the children with whom we're working as well, which means that the costs associated with those children, of course, is bigger because of the kind of work that we're needing to do. So there is something about the kind of types of children that we're now working with and for whom we have responsibility for, which has changed quite significantly over the last few years and continues to change. There are also a whole raft of other things that impact on our children and therefore impacts on the services that we need to deliver. So we know that through the pandemic, for example, we've seen an increase in the complexity of cases coming in. We've seen an increase in the impact of, for example, domestic abuse in homes as well. So all of our growth and demand is really looking at the children for whom we have responsibility for and making sure that our services can meet their needs, but also obviously supporting other organisations too as well, and making sure that we are able to deliver services that will have an impact on those children. So I think that there is a whole range of issues that are impacting on the demand and the complexity for children, and some of it's about what's happening for children, so things like COVID and all of those kind of things, but some of it is about that changing responsibilities that we have as a department as well.
Thank you very much, Jane. It's so easy to look at the cost of things and the figures that we're looking at without just contemplating why we're facing those costs. So that's really useful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Jane, it's quite a quick one, really. It's just regarding the unaccompanied asylum seekers. It's just that you said you were quite confident in reducing the budget, but then you've said that it's a very volatile budget and can change very quickly. So I'm just wondering what the contingency is there if it does get volatile and it changes very quickly.
Yeah, thank you. So we haven't reduced the budget, we've reduced our growth requirements. So it's really important because what we've done is we've projected our growth based on the grants that were coming in from the Home Office. So our growth projections looked at the number of unaccompanied asylum seekers on average we get arriving in Leicestershire each year. And it then projected the money that we would need in order to support those children. Over just this year, the Home Office, as it said, has increased the funding. So we haven't altered our projections in terms of the numbers coming in. What we've done is we've altered our financial requirement as a result of getting more money from the Home Office.
Yeah, that explains it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Taylor.
Yeah, just so members are aware, because it's probably a good time to mention it, just to let them know that the Children's Social Care Review has been launched by the government in the last week or so. So that's going to look at all these issues that we're all raising today about the growth and the complexity of children, and our breadth of what we're doing is all under the review now for the government. So not sure how long it's going to take, but obviously we're going to feed in all those issues that we've been talking about today into that review. So we're just working our way through that. So if members want to find there's more information on the Gov UK website from the DFE, members want to have a look at that.
Thank you very much. Right, could I ask Mr. Welsh and Mrs. Wright to lower their hand? Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Wright. Thank you, Mr. Welsh. And we now move on back to yourself. Jane, we've done growth. We're now going on to savings. Do you want to take a few of these together? For example, the take the savings and then do the dedicated school grants and school funding formula.
Yes.
And anything else you think you could that combines it all into one pot, as it were?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So if I take savings next. So we've set out the proposed savings on the local authority budget in Appendix B. Those savings total 3.75 million in 2021-22 and total 16 million over the next 4 years. On top of that, we've got the savings set out in the High Needs Development Plan, which totaled 25.8 million over the period of the MTFS. So the first line is our Defining Children's Services for the Family programme, which has savings in it starting at 2.2 million in 2021-22, rising to 13.2 million by 24-25. I don't propose to go into any more detail on that because we've got the full paper on that in the next item. The next line of savings is around our Children's Innovation Partnership. The savings that are included in 2021 are £50,000 and those rise to £500,000 by 24-25. The savings that we've set out here are attributable to the new models of care that I've talked about. They're being co-designed with Bernardo's, and we took a plan to Cabinet in March 2020, where the investment of the capital budget of 2.5 million was agreed. The proposal for this is to create an assessment and resource team and hub, which will work with children and young people, both in an outreach capacity, so out in other residential provision, but also within an assessment bed as well, hub bed, where we can bring children in and undertake a really thorough assessment to understand exactly what their needs are and where they're best placed for us to meet those needs. We are also proposing, as part of this model, to build a number of multifunctional residential properties. And this is about creating more capacity that we can use flexibly to meet ever-changing demands. So one of the first properties that we are looking at is a multifunctional property that we can use for parent and child placements, because, as I said, as part of our growth and some of the demand we've got, we're seeing an increase in the requirement for parent and child placements. So the savings targets associated with that are around us building the market and increasing sufficiency as well. And then we've got the final line in around the Department Efficiency savings, where we've put 1.5 million in next year, rising to 2.3 by the end of the MTFS. And this really is to build on the work that we've already done within the department around identifying both in-year savings and more longer-term efficiency savings, separate from the work that we're doing around our Defining Children's Services programme and our high needs block. So some of them do incorporate some spend controls. They do look at kind of how we manage our money across the department. They are looking at efficiencies rather than service reductions or income generation as well. So I'll pause there. Sorry, just in terms of savings under development, we've done a huge amount of work to identify all possible savings at the moment within the department, and they are mainly or fully really encompassed in those programmes that I've outlined in the paper. They're really extensive, so the programmes cover all areas of the department, and obviously are set out to achieve those 16 million over the 4 years. It doesn't mean that we won't continue to look for additional savings, but at the moment we aren't identifying any further savings whilst we've got this full programme of work going ahead. So I'll pause there, Chair, for questions on savings.
At the moment, I have no questions on that section, so we'll move on.
Thank you, Chair. So if I take the dedicated schools block first, so the in 2021-22, the DSG remains calculated in 4 separate blocks. So we've got the schools block, which is 455 million. We have got the central school services block, which is 3.6 million. The high needs block, which I'll go on to in a bit more detail later, which is 83 million. And the early years block, which is 36 million. The current MTFS, the 21-22 MTFS, sets the overall schools budget as a net nil budget at local authority level, but there is that funding gap within the high needs block, which will be carried forward as an overspend, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Just a little bit on the schools block. In 21-22, we do see there will be further movement towards a national funding formula. And that national funding formula is going to fund all pupils at the same rate, irrespective of which authority they attend school in. It does, though, use pupil characteristics that alongside the national funded rate. So within the national funding formula, it's only the per pupil entitlement that's universal to all. All the other factors reflect different incidents of additional needs. So funding levels between local authorities and individual schools within those local authorities will still vary as a result of those pupil characteristics that are added to the national funding levels. So in 21-22, the formula does still remain soft, which means that the formula calculates a kind of notional school allocations, and it's up to the local authority to apply their local funding formula to that in order to generate those local budgets. But the DFE has confirmed that it is going to move towards the hard formula as soon as possible. Within the schools block, local authorities do receive funding for the initial revenue costs, for the kind of startup costs of commissioning additional primary and secondary places. The expenditure in this budget is expected to rise from 21-22 and to peak at 5 million in 23. But we are setting underspend aside and earmarked to meet this peak, and that position will be closely monitored. In terms of school funding formula, nationally, as we've said, the schools will receive a minimum per pupil money. This is going to increase by 2% next year. The minimum pupil funding levels for primary are set at 4,180, and in Key Stage 3 and 4, you can see they're set out at 5,215 and 5,715 respectively. I guess it is really important to note that despite there has been an overall increase in school funding, there are a number of schools across the county who are still funded at the floor, so they're funded at that kind of minimum pupil guarantee. So whilst there's an overall increase, not all schools are going to experience an increase in funding per pupil in the same way that other schools will across the county. Do you want me to stop there, Chair, or do you want me to move on to high needs block? Oh, I think you're muted, Chair, sorry.
I think I have no hands showing at the moment for points to raise on what you've done so far. So I would suggest you just crack on at the moment until I see.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll pick up the high needs block through down to the capital programme. So in relation to the high needs block of the dedicated schools grant, the 21-22 is the second year of a 3-year settlement for the school funding, and members will recall that the government did increase high needs funding by 730 million nationally. Local authorities do have a guaranteed minimum increase of 8% per head population, and the Leicestershire County Council does receive that minimum 8% increase. So the provisional high needs element of the dedicated schools grant is 83.1 million. And as we've set out in the paragraphs below, we are projecting an overspend on that and then a cumulative overspend over the period of the MTFS. So we've developed the high needs development plan, which Paula will be giving more detail on in a later report. And I know we've brought to members previously, that's doing really 3 key things. And one is around really ensuring that children can remain in mainstream school where it's possible for them to do so, to improve our SEND services, but also to increase the range of cost-effective and high-quality provision. And that's included building new provision across Leicestershire over the last few and forthcoming years. So we've set out the forecast position on the high needs element of the DSG in paragraph 33, and you can see that we are projecting a cumulative funding gap of 22 million next year, rising to 29 million over the period of the MTFS. And that's despite the achievement that we're projecting of 11 million savings as part of the high needs development plan, rising to 25 million savings throughout the period of the MTFS. So that there is significant work going on to reduce our spend in the high needs block, but the case remains that there isn't enough money within the budget to fund what we need to fund in terms of the requirements for children with SEND across Leicestershire. That position is common across most local authorities nationally, where most local authorities are either in a deficit position or getting close to that position. The issues are around the kind of structural features of the SEND system, and whilst there is a SEND review launched to look at that, we're still kind of awaiting the outcome of that review, and at the moment it's still the requirement of the local authority to bear the risk within the SEND area, and we have very little ability to influence neither demand nor the cost of the provision. So the funding position that we've included above does include a transfer from the schools block of the dedicated schools grant in 22-23 of 2 million, and we are going to be engaging schools in developing proposals for this transfer in the next few weeks before we enter into consultation and seek approval from the schools forum. The final bit on the high needs block really is that local authorities are now required to carry forward DSG deficits to the following year, and we can only add to the deficit of the dedicated schools grant with the approval of the Secretary of State. In terms of the central services block, this block funds all school-related expenditure, such as existing school-based premature retirement costs and all of those things. The settlement is 3.6 million. And then in terms of the early years block, this element has been increased by 66 million nationally. The grant does remain determined by the number of children who are participating in early years education, and it contributes towards the fee. There is an uplift as a result of the 66 million, but it equates to about 8p an hour for 2-year-olds and 6p an hour for 3 and 4-year-olds as well. And then finally, in paragraph 40, we've detailed the grants that are largely received from the DFE that contribute towards the budget of the department as well. I'll pause there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Parton.
With the gap of 22 million, you explained about the 2 million being divided across the DSG, and then that it could be kept for you can run a deficit and you carry it over for another year. But there is a SEND review going on. Well, when do you expect to hear about that, and what work is happening with local government, with the relevant department about that? Because given such a gap, the question it could be asked, what would we do if there was no change?
Yeah, so apologies, Mr. Parson, I've probably confused it by going through the report in brief. So the 2 million transfer is a proposal to move £2 million from the schools block into the high needs block in order to help mitigate some of the problems we've got within the high needs block. And then separately from that, the DFE have said that we need to carry over the deficits that we've indicated at the bottom. So there are just a number of different bits going on that kind of contribute towards that overall budget. In terms of the SEND review, it's really positive that there is a review of the SEND services and SEND system that's happening at a national level. So what we're experiencing in Leicestershire in terms of the pressures on the budget are being experienced nationally by most other local authorities, where essentially what we're seeing is the numbers of children who are in receipt of an education, health and care plan are increasing, and the unit cost of those children is also increasing. So we have no control over the number of children that come into us, nor do we have much control over the kind of market and where we can place those children. So the SEND review is looking at the not just the kind of budgets and the implications on budgets, but it's looking at the system as a whole in order to ensure that it meets children with SEND needs, but also looks at what some of the pressures are on local authorities in terms of dealing with the pressures on the budgets. And then your last bit in terms of kind of what the solutions are, we are alongside every other local authority in the country advocating very strongly with the DFE the position that we're currently in terms of our overspend and cumulative funding gap is not a sustainable position for any local authority to be in. And there's various national conversations going on to highlight some of those concerns.
Thank you. Right, we now move on to the capital programme.
Yep, sorry, I'll just go back to find my place. So yes, in terms of the capital programme, the proposed capital programme totaled 84.4 million, the majority of which is external funding. So there's not huge amounts of call on the LCC capital funding over the 4-year life. The capital programme continues to focus mainly upon the delivery of additional primary and secondary places, but it also includes those additional places that we know need to be delivered as part of supporting the High Needs Development Plan. I won't go through the capital sections in detail, Chair, because I'm assuming members have read it, but obviously it does outline a lot of what I've already touched on in terms of provision of additional school places, the SEND programme and the residential design brief that I've already detailed.
Thank you. Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, I couldn't resist the temptation to ask, you've got in Appendix C £1 million towards Donisthorpe and Moira Primary. I'm not concerned if you don't have the answer straight away, but I would be interested to know what that's for, why the two schools are bracketed together like that. I know they're neighbours, and which schools having which share of the money.
Yeah, I won't be able to answer that for you now, Mr. Sheehan, but I can certainly get an answer to that.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Chair. It's the struggling with the IT. It's the provision of additional school places. I suppose it's my usual question. Can I be assured that there will be enough 106 money to provide school places for the local children after the building in Oadby, rather than providing it for the students of Leicester? Because the way developments are, they tend not to be fit in with school terms and stuff like that. So are there going to be enough if the houses are completed mid-term and people move in and want their children to go there? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there are two separate issues there. So the Section 106 money and the development of school places is based on the need for school places for children who reside in Leicestershire. So we at the moment have sufficient places for children who live in Leicestershire within our Leicestershire schools. So our overall sufficiency of school places is good, and it will meet the needs of the numbers of children who live within Leicestershire. Obviously, as you've pointed out, we have some issues within certain areas of the county where either due to popularity or other means, the provision of the ability to get a place for parents who don't live or come into the area late is often difficult. So in terms of what we build in terms of school places, we can only base that on the numbers of children that we are projecting will move into areas that are subject to 106 developments. In terms of the kind of overall school place planning and pressure on school places, that will remain the case whilst catchment areas of schools or certainly late applicants to schools are made. The 106 programme won't mitigate that. It builds places for the kind of local provision.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have no more indicators of more questions or comments, so we'll now move on. Thank you very much, Jane, for that very thorough report on the MTFS, and we'll move on to item 9, which is the update on defining children and family services for the future programme, and this starts on page 41.
Thank you, Chair. I am joined this afternoon by two colleagues from Newton Europe who are going to support me in the presentation of this paper, but also are available for questions. So if it's okay, before I start, I will just introduce my two colleagues from Newton. In fact, I'll ask them to introduce themselves. Luke and Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Afternoon, everybody. I'm Luke Trigidjo. I'm the Programme Director for Newton for the Defining Children's work.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Knight. I'm a partner with Newton, and I've been accountable for all the work which Newton has done with Leicestershire County Council since August 18, including the Adult TOM programme.
Thank you very much indeed. Jane, back into you to present the programme.
Thank you, Chair. So the report that you've got in front of you is providing you with the details of the outcome of the diagnostic assessment, which was undertaken across our targeted early help services and children's social care services. And we've also outlined the next steps of the Defining Children's Services for the Future programme and the approach taken. So just by way of background, and obviously we've already set out within the MTFS, we are facing some significant challenges in terms of increasing demand, both previously, but also in terms of what we're projecting over the next 4 years. We went through a competitive process, commissioned, and through that commissioned our colleagues in Newton Europe to work alongside us to undertake this diagnostic assessment of our frontline services. But also we've engaged them to then continue to work with us to support and develop the delivery of the change programme. The outcome of the diagnostic assessment went through an independent gateway review, and we were given approval to proceed with this partnership from Cabinet in December. When we went through the process, the bid did attract two bidders, and Newton Europe were successful, really based on their commitment to improving outcomes for children. So the focus of this programme is about how we improve outcomes for our children and families across Leicestershire. And Newton also have a very clear evidence-based and rigorous approach to performance as well. Of note as well, and Luke will give a little bit more detail about this as we go through, is that Newton Europe have a contingent fee model, which essentially guarantees that they will deliver the savings, and that then what we pay them is commensurate on the benefits that they deliver. And as I said, we will give a little bit more detail on what that looks like and how it feels as we go through the meeting. So the diagnostic assessment involved working with staff from across the department to really undertake a deep dive and review of a number of children's cases and a number of different areas, and to look at whether or not anything could have been done to prevent children escalating to higher levels of need and intervention, but also to identify opportunities to improve outcomes for children and young people. And you can see in paragraph 13, there were a great deal of staff involved within those workshops and cases reviewed as well. The department then looked at all of the opportunities that were developed and really looked at whether or not we would want to take them forward based on our financial confidence, our operational confidence, a whole range of other areas. And through that, we identified a number of opportunities that will support the future proofing of the department to make sure that we deliver the right interventions at the right time, and again, that kind of focus on best outcomes for children. So the change programme that we're embarking on is going to focus on a number of things, and some of it is around optimising our practice, some of it is about improving our systems, looking at our culture and our ways of working, and also looking quite deeply at the way in which we deliver things, so our operational delivery. And we've identified 3 areas of work, which I'll come to in a minute. There were broadly four main themes that came out of the diagnostic, and the first one was around children's pathways, with a need for a greater focus on early interventions. The second one was around timeliness of intervention, so ensuring that we deliver things in a timely way to children. The third one was about settings, and a lot of the discussion we've already had around where we place our children and the most appropriate places. And then the final area was around our children with disabilities and ensuring that those young people and children are supported to achieve greater levels of independence. The opportunities are a combination of a number of things really, but the benefits are primarily around cost, demand and avoidance, as well as improving quality and outcomes as well, and improved productivity. And as we set out in the previous paper, the benefits that we've set out are estimated to be in the region of 9.3 million, with a stretched ambition. So that would be kind of where we would really push ourselves to achieving 13.1 million over the next 4 years. And that's what we've included within our MTFS in terms of those savings. And that's about preventing the need for growth in the future by looking at how we reduce our demand within the service. We've now pulled together a joint programme team, so we've pulled staff from the department and backfilled those posts in order to have subject experts within the design teams as well. And we have Nikki Collins, our Deputy Assistant Director, who is leading the programme and has as an additional post to drive the work, and certainly have an expert from within the department fully supporting and developing the work. So in terms of some of the findings from the assessments, they fit into a number of opportunities, and some of them are around how we can prevent children from escalating from child in need to child protection, or from child protection into children in care. Some of them focus on how we can improve our placement of children, so get them where they need to be permanently more quickly. And some of it focuses on how we can further grow our capacity of internal foster carers as well. We've looked at a whole range of things, and we've outlined in paragraphs 22 and 23 what some of the findings suggested, but some of it is about if we'd intervened differently or earlier, we could have prevented escalation. And obviously we know that early intervention is really successful with children. What the diagnostic did find is that the current decisions and level of intervention is correct. There was identification around if we could have supported these children earlier, it could have prevented that escalation. The other bit that the diagnostic assessment found is around the differences in our level of intensity of support, and whether or not we can do things differently in terms of how intensively we support families to improve outcomes as well. The review also highlighted the prevalence of domestic abuse across our cases, and we're looking at whether or not there's some work we can do to better support children who are in families where domestic abuse is present. There was a lot of work looking at how we can improve what we call drift in case management. So looking at the kind of length of time cases are open, and whether or not we can do anything differently in terms of our intervention and length of time children are worked with and spend within our care as well. And then the paragraph 27 outlines some of the impact or issues around our internal and external foster carers. So we do use external foster carers, and obviously there are some opportunities to improve or increase the number of internal foster carers as well. And also that the review did look at the allocation of foster carers at that time. And as we've set out in paragraph 28, it did find that just over half of the current capacity had been used. That was a moment in time analysis, and that we have done some deeper looking at that, where we've explored why only half was used. Some of that is about COVID related health issues for our foster carers, and some of it is around suitable placement matching. But obviously our ambition is to make sure that we use our capacity as best we can to place our children. And then lastly, the diagnostic assessment did look at some of the provision around residential placements as well, and how we can really improve our family-based matching and placement of children as well. And then obviously you can see that there was some thinking around the Disabled Children's Service, and that whilst children were on the right pathway, we think that we could improve outcomes around transition, but also better enablement as well. Just also to note, as part of the programme, Newton Europe are going to deliver 100 hours of support to our looked after children of Leicestershire, just as part of the social value impact to our contracts as well, and we're looking forward to working with Newton on that. I'm going to hand over to Luke, who's just going to take us briefly through the programme approach. Thank you, Luke.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, so just briefly outline the sort of scope of work we're taking forward into the next phase of work, talk about the sort of principles of the partnership arrangement that we have with Leicestershire, and then finally just talk about the programme phases and a little bit about the project team we've got around the work. As Jane has outlined, there are sort of 4 organisational levers that we've sort of looked at in the sort of scope of changes that we think need to be made to realise these opportunities, that then sit across the 3 key work streams and a couple of enabling ones that I'll touch on. So those sort of 4 levers try and encompass all the different elements that we might need to change. So that's both the structure of our teams and the processes that they follow. It covers the IT systems and how those support staff ways of working, and then our interactions with children and families, and then also the capability and practice of our team, which is very closely aligned with the final area around sort of cultures and behaviours of our staff across the service. And so we're applying those sort of organisational levers across 3 key work streams, the objectives of which Jane has already outlined around pathways, around placements, and around children with disabilities. Those work streams will obviously work very closely together because there are lots of sort of interdependencies and interrelated pieces, but they'll also be supported by 2 sort of what we're calling enabling strands, which is really around data and systems. As many of you will be aware, one of the sort of key things that we as Newton bring to the table is a very rigorous evidence-based approach. And to make that happen, we need a lot of our sort of data and systems to be working in a different way to support that rigorous evidence base. And then the other key enabling strand is around sort of communication, culture and engagement. Communication, culture and engagement. And this is both across engagement of our wider staff group, of our service users and people who have lived experience of our services, and then also our partner organisations. And this is something that forms a really important element of all the programmes we do, but even more so in these sort of times of COVID impact and lots of staff working remotely. How we bring people along that journey is a really sort of core part of it. So that then leads on to sort of the principles of our sort of partnership arrangement, and really underpinning this is this idea of collaboration. We're very clear as Newton, we're not practitioners by background, and even if we were, we wouldn't be expert practitioners from knowing Leicestershire. And so it really becomes about how do we bring the right team around this programme to deliver the opportunities, and that brings sort of Newton's change management and sort of data and analytics skill set. It brings our expert practitioners, our service users and families, and our partners to really form the right team of expertise around it. And that also allows us to then sort of co-design and develop things locally. We have lots of experience working with over 50 local authorities around the country, and we bring some of that knowledge to bear, but it's never about cutting and pasting solutions, because we don't find those things stick, they don't last. It really, what makes it sustainable is when it's really co-designed and co-owned then with staff locally. I've mentioned already about that sort of robust measurement and monitoring of results, and that's really key to the way we work, both from being clear and confident that we're delivering improved outcomes for children and families, but then also providing Leicestershire with assurance that the money that is being spent on us as a programme partner is money well spent. Linked to that tracking and measuring is a real desire to test things robustly before we then roll them out. So a lot of our focus at work at the moment is on to pilot sites and making sure that any changes to ways of working, practices, processes, structures are having the impact we want before we then roll them out county-wide. And then sort of final 2 elements of the principles. One is around finding the right balance between consistency. We want to have the right level of consistency county-wide, but then also balancing that with the need to flex to the local variations and needs of our residents. So finding the sort of sweet spot between consistency and sort of flexibility for our local residents. And then finally, a big bit of our partnership approach is embedding an environment of continuous improvement, and that's both for staff within the Children and Family Service, but then also with the transformation unit, and how do we transfer some of the knowledge and skills and continue some of the sort of positive journey that we went on with Leicestershire through the Adults Tom programme in transferring the knowledge and upskilling staff locally. So finally, just want to touch on onto programme phases and the programme team. As Jane alluded to, we've been in the process of recruiting a joint team. So we now have over 30 people from the Directorate, from the Transformation Unit, from our supporting functions of finance and HR, along with Newton colleagues around the programme. And we're entering into what we call our pilot phase. So this is 3 to 6 month period where we're developing, testing, iterating, measuring the new ways of working, new structures, new systems, new processes, to rigorously understand what works and what will have the impact and outcomes that we need. And that will be followed by a 6 to 12 month rollout and sustainability period, where we then make sure that those changes are embedded across the county and are really sustainable without the need for ongoing support from Newton. So that's what I wanted to cover there. I'll hand back over to Jane.
Thank you, Luke. Just the final bit really around partnership working. Obviously, the work is working very closely with external partners as well as the areas that Luke's identified. And we've been engaging with partners throughout the design, but also will do through the implementation phase. So I'll pause there, Chair, if that's okay, for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have 3 at the moment, Mr. Sheehan, Mr. Welsh and Mrs. Wright. So I'll start with Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a few points. Luke, I think you said you'd worked with 50 authorities. I'd be interested to know how many children and families departments you've worked with on a project of similar scale to this. That's the first point. Reading the report, paragraph 12, I think it is, on page, let me see, where are we? 42. The last sentence there, of note, I'll quote, of note was their contingent fee model. That's obviously talking about Newton Europe, proposing that they were guaranteed to deliver savings with fees being commensurate to benefits delivered. Now, man in the street, man or woman in the street might be forgiven for asking, well, does that mean that you're only paid in terms of the gross amounts of savings that you achieve? I'm sure you're going to vigorously respond to that. But I'd like to hear from Jane as well what targets are being set that condition the fee. That's just a flavour. I don't need the full set, but just enough to make your point on that one and refute, hopefully, the point I attempted to make. And also, what assurances can we have that the changes will bring permanent benefits rather than temporary ones? We want to prevent demand, not suppress it for a short while. Thank you.
So what we can do, Mr. Sheehan, if it helps, is I'm going to put a couple of slides up that Luke will just talk through briefly around the contingent model, because we know that it's a it's a new phrase to many of us. So I will share some slides that Luke will speak to, and obviously Luke will be able to share the detail of other children's services local authorities that they've worked with successfully as well. Just the last question around the assurance around permanent benefits. I'll just touch on it, but I know Luke or Steve will also pick up from their experience of working in other authorities, but equally with our adult social care colleagues here in Leicestershire. One of the other reasons why we chose to work with Newton Europe is because their whole model is based on working alongside organisations as opposed to doing to. So the whole programme has been developed with our staff and engaging our staff in the change and moving them in the changing cultural, changing design and all of those kind of things. The level of engagement from our staff group, our managers and our leaders in the department is incredibly high. So people are really optimistic about the programme. They can see it is about best outcomes for children. So I feel very optimistic that the changes that we implement will be fully embedded, because they'll be owned by those who are responsible for the delivery. But I know Luke or Steve will be able to add a little bit more. Luke, do you want to pick up the question around other organisations just while I load the slides up?
Yes, yeah, of course. Yeah, so as you said, we worked with over 50 authorities. That's in a sort of range of work on adult social care and children's social care, and sort of increasingly some sort of pan-council work as well. So we've worked on specifically on the children's side, to answer your question, with over a dozen authorities. You might be aware we were selected by the LGA to conduct a review which involved work with 8 authorities, looking at what factors were driving variation in spend across children's authorities, and that included a range of county councils, of unitaries, and borough councils, London boroughs as well. And you'll be aware we've delivered work with other larger authorities such as Kent County Council, and we're currently working with Derbyshire and Greenwich. So yeah, there's a significant number of authorities that we're drawing on from experience.
Adding to Jane's point around the sustainability of savings, so I completely agree with everything Jane was saying around how we work in partnership, and a lot of emphasis on building the right joint team from the start of the programme and throughout the programme, so it's being co-worked together, and that transfer of skills happens very naturally throughout the programme. And the style of working is very much mentoring and support and solving problems together. I would say that is then supplemented above that with quite targeted training, induction courses where people are inducted in the same material that we use for our consulting staff. And then it goes a level above that where particular individuals such as the business improvement managers within the transformation unit and ongoing improvement roles within the service are identified and further trained with those methodologies. I think really importantly, as we get to the back end of the programme, the defining what a successful completion looks like is not just delivery of results, but we go through a period of time where we quantitatively measure how well handed over we think the programme is. And that is both, do the staff believe and feel engaged with the new ways of working, as well as objectively measuring by an independent person within the service to say, are staff adhering to the ways of working and how we want things to happen. That then triggers a process of the programme team starting to step back from the detailed support, and it's only after then that the formal results of the programme are then quantified and measured. So it's actually a business as usual type operating environment whereby we can then look back to that and say, do we believe we've actually jointly set out to, we've jointly achieved the results we set out to in a way that can be carried on. In terms of the contingent fee arrangement, so the fee which has been developed has been fixed. It will, as can be seen on the screen, what we're are guaranteeing is that the recurrent annualised benefit of the programme will be at least £7 million. We've got the target of between 9.3, well, the sort of target value is 9.3. In our experience of every public programme that we've done over the last 9.5 years, we have beaten the equivalent of the target value. And very importantly, say that's not a Newton view of the world. That is the local finance team as they have measured that. So we expect some headroom between that, just so that we don't get into, we're not sort of jointly incentivised to try and calculate things to the nearest £100, so to speak. But in answer to your question, so the fee is fixed, capped, and if we're in any risk of sort of falling beneath the 7 million recurrent annualised benefit, we would seek to put in additional resource at our own cost to ensure that Leicestershire got the result it needed.
I don't know if it's just worth picking up on some of the bits here, just to say, underpinning that sort of fee guarantee model are a number of sort of commercial assurance mechanisms, so that sort of at every stage of the programme, the delivery is de-risked from a Leicestershire perspective to a very significant degree. We don't believe in complete risk transfer to Newton. The whole principle of this is partnership, and that we have a sort of shared sense of skin in the game, as it were, and risk in the delivery of the programme. But yeah, at every stage, there's the ability for example, for Leicestershire to terminate just by giving us notice. That same that same ability to terminate doesn't operate the other way. So we're not just going to cut and run. Really underpinning this idea of transparent benefits measurement, so that we're not marking our own homework. This is a collaborative effort between finance colleagues, between business intelligence colleagues, and ourselves to come up with the ways of measuring the deliverables of the programme. We mentioned about having a checkpoint at the end of the design phase. So before any of those changes that we've developed get rolled out, there's a review and a checkpoint to make sure that everybody's happy and confident that those are going to have the impact that we want before we then go and say roll those out across the whole of the authority. And that's just a general theme actually of having regular checkpoints and understanding, having very clear deliverables and sort of KPI glide paths that we're expecting to hit at each of those points in time. And if we're not hitting those, then there's the mechanism within the contract to delay payment to Newton.
Okay. Can I go on to Mr. Welsh now, please?
Well, Chair, I'm not sure I have a question answered fully. I mean, I'm impressed that I've had a slideshow in answer to a question. That's probably the first time that's happened. But I thought Jane was going to give us some examples of the types of targets that have been set here.
So the targets are primarily financial and are focused around the MTFS. So we have set out in great detail for each of the areas that we're working on with Newton. So the pathways, the settings. We are anticipating, as a result of the work that we do, it will have a significant financial impact, and that's what we're monitoring the performance of Newton against in terms of paying. So whilst we will be setting within each pathway, within each key area, we will be setting a number of outcomes we would want to achieve. So things like, ensuring that children have their needs met and a whole raft of things. Not all of those have been established yet because we haven't set up the designs, but the ultimate goal and the ultimate thing that we're working on with Newton is around reducing the costs associated with the department's budgets, and we set that out in terms of what we're seeking to achieve. Within each pathway, there will also be a number of different outcomes set that we would want to achieve for children. Those will be set as we go through the design phase, but the work with Newton is based on the fee model, which is based on the savings targets set.
Jane, just before I go back to Mr. Sheehan and then on to Mr. Welsh and Mr. Wright, I am presuming that regular reports and updates will be brought back to this committee once everything is up and running. And I will leave you and the lead member to sort out the time frame that would be best
to ensure that's the case, and how you do that.
So part of the programme, we've set up a really robust governance structure that there's a programme delivery board that I'm responsible for chairing, and also a board that monitors the benefits on a regular basis. So part of the process involves quite regular scrutiny of not just the work that's being undertaken, but the benefits that are being achieved. And absolutely, as director of the department, my ambition is to ensure that not only do we achieve best outcomes for children, but they're sustainable and embedded in everything that we do long term.
You've got my support in attempting to do that, Jane. So
thank you, Mr. Sheehan.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, so I can move on now to Mr. Welsh and Mrs. Wright. Mr. Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. We've been through 2 Ofsted inspections while I've served on this committee. And following those, we've had action plans that in many ways sounded very similar to the discussions we've just had. But one day, Ofsted are going to come along and inspect us following this. So what reassurances do I have that what we will do will meet the satisfaction of Ofsted? And what's so different about this to all the work that's been done over the last few years?
So yeah, I mean, in relation to Ofsted, obviously, at the heart of what we do is around improving outcomes for children. But we knew that on entering and embarking on this programme, we needed to keep an eye on the fact that, of course, we're subject to regulatory inspection. So we have very carefully linked our Defining Children's Services of the Future programme with our continuous improvement programme. So you know, and you will have had regular reports at this committee on the work that we've been doing following the 2016 Ofsted inspection and our 2019 Ofsted inspection. So the two pieces of work are knitted together very closely. And Newton Europe also have previous experience of working with local authorities with a kind of eye on what that looks like for Ofsted. So the two bits of work are knitted together and aligned. And you're right, the things that we're talking about improving are the things that we've talked about improving for a long time, because that's what we need to do for children. Just in answer to your second question around what's different, for me that fits with why we wanted to work with a partner. So we knew that we've done a huge amount of work over the last 4 years in terms of improving and developing the department, but actually we know we've got further to go. So part of our appetite of working with an external partner is around how we really push ourselves to the next stage and challenge ourselves and our thinking in what else can be done to improve outcomes for children. So this is about staying on that same trajectory of best outcomes for children, improving our services, getting to good or outstanding with Ofsted, but actually engaging Newton as a colleague to work with us on this means that we're being challenged more. They're bringing in some different way of thinking and external expertise as well. So I think in terms of what will be different is that it will continue with our development, but I think it will support us in some of the areas that we know we've needed to improve and perhaps haven't had the tools or the experience or the thinking to get us to that place.
Thank you very much, Jane.
Thank you. Mrs. Wright.
Thank you. I think just a little bit of clarity, because I'm struggling with, you mentioned pilot sites, you've mentioned pilot areas, regular checkpoints, and then programme delivery board. And I'm just struggling to see or join the dots on, is it an area demographic? Is it an area of work? And I just need some clarity, please.
No, that's absolutely fine. And don't worry, we're introducing a whole raft of new concepts as well. So it's absolutely fine. I'm going to ask Nikki Collins to pick this question up because she's responsible for kind of leading some of the development of this. I think she'll be able to talk through the kind of development of the pilot areas and what that means. Just before I do that, just to clarify in terms of the programme delivery board and other things I set out is the governance around it. So we have a governance structure around the programme that I chair and others chair groups within it. And then the pilot and the implementation is the work that we're doing. So I'm going to hand over to Nikki and she'll be able to talk a little bit about the pilot sites and how we identify them. Nikki, is that okay?
Yeah, it's fine. Thanks, Jane. So I think we've alluded to them, we've mentioned them already, but just that you have that clarity and sort of more of a concrete understanding of what that means, is that we've got 3 project lines. So the first project line that was mentioned is pathways. The second project line is placements, and the first project line is independence. And under each project lines, there are multiple work streams where we'll be focusing on specific areas. So for pathways, and we have got a lovely new diagram that I can have shared with you that actually sets that out beautifully. We've our comms team have worked really well to get it onto one page. But if I just give you a little bit of a verbal, so the pathways project with the 3 work streams, the 3 work streams will focus on the first one on processes and tightening how our teams interact together and making sure we have the best possible intervention early on in families. So it is really about process and systems and interactions and what our teams look like. So, for example, how our children and family wellbeing service interfaces with our children's social care services and what that needs to look like. The second part of pathways is about intervention effectiveness. So we've the diagnostics identified that most children who are coming back into our service repeatedly, or so they might even have escalated all the way to child protection. We think we've done a really good job. We close the case and very soon it comes back into our service. And those children, and also those children who escalate through our service and end up in care, that there's a very large number of them that have domestic abuse as a common factor. And the diagnostics indicated that while we might be in our plans talking about domestic abuse, we aren't as effectively as we could. For about 40% of our children who have domestic abuse in their life, we're not effectively managing the underlying factors, and the underlying factors that are contributing to the domestic abuse are things like alcohol use, mental health of parents. So what we need to do in intervention effectiveness is make sure that we've got a service that addresses the underlying factors, and that we're working well with partners to address the underlying factors so that the case doesn't represent with us as domestic abuse. So that's the second pathway, second work stream. And the third work stream is reducing the amount of time that children spend in care. And we're looking specifically for those children who are already in care, but could exit through what we call an SGO, a special guardianship order, which is either made to the foster carer or the friends or family that that child is living with, because we can do that. We can place a child in a friend and foster placement that then becomes a foster placement, and what we need to do to strengthen that offer. So which part of our business do we need to do more effectively to get that child and that family to the point where they don't need us, and then what support services do we need in place that will convince that family and that child that they don't need us, that actually there's a different way of them getting support, and they don't need a social worker in a children in care service, or they don't need to be allocated to us, so that we can set up a very specific support service. So that gives you the detail around pathways. And for placements, there are multiple work streams. The first one deals with, are we using our own resources as effectively as we can? So, for example, do we maximise the amount of vacancies with our foster carers that we have with our foster carers and our supported lodgings, and which systems and processes and interactions are contributing to us not using those vacancies as effectively as we can. Then there's another element which is about, can we have more? So is our recruitment process effective? Can we recruit more? And what elements would allow us to recruit more? So Newton are helping us look at what those factors are. And the third element is about children in residential care. And there's no doubt that those children, that some of those children needed residential care. For those, what systems, processes and support do we need to reduce the amount of time they spend in residential care? But there's also some of those children who didn't need residential care, and their social workers never requested residential care and have ended up in residential care because at that point in time, nobody else wanted them. So Newton are helping us look at how did we end up in that problem with the social worker? Nobody wanted residential care for that child, but we were left with that as the only option. What is it about our system and the way we work that resulted in that for those children? So that's a synopsis of that
Thanks,
project.
Nikki.
And then the third and final project is around independence and working with our families and the children in the Disabled Children's Service to make sure that they are ready for independence at a much earlier age than we are currently achieving.
Thanks, Nikki.
But we will get that view on a page out to you, because I think that it really does provide you with all of that in a really good summary.
Thank you, Nikki.
Okay.
Wow, very comprehensive. I didn't expect that. Thank you.
Okie doke. Mr. Sheehan, you've still got your hand up. Thank you. Right, I see no more, but I'd like to thank everybody very much. I realised Stephen had to go to another drama or something turned up, but thank you, Luke, and please pass on our thanks to him as well. And with that, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which, but thank you very much, Luke, is the item 10, which is the Special Education Needs and Disabilities update, and this is Paula is going to join us. Just before I hand over to Paula, Jane, are you going to have to leave shortly?
I am, Chair. I was just wondering whether, rather than we ask Paula to go through the paper, whether we assume members have read it and take questions. Yes, I'm quite happy with that. So you've got 30 seconds, and Mr. Kaufman has put his hand up straight away. And we'll just take questions because we've still got some. And I know, Jane, you'll have to leave very shortly. Yeah, we'd be happy to move straight to questions if you'd like, Chair, because we can assume that members have read the paper. Perfect. Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On page 59, 41 paragraph, my question is a very quick question, may take a bit longer to answer, though. What have we learnt in the fact that we've lost 7 out of 8 cases to the local government ombudsman, and how can we avoid that happening in the future?
Thank you, Chair. I can respond to that. We obviously did include this in the paper. I'll try and be as brief as possible in response to a specific request to that. I've got a number of examples of where we've made changes to practice and process in order to ensure that the things that we've learned from those local government ombudsman complaints are prevented from happening again, as well as other complaints that come in that don't quite reach the level of the government ombudsman. Rather than go through those, because I am very conscious of people's time, I could put those together in a short briefing to provide some assurance that there are significant things that have been put in place in terms of our learning, and to ensure that things of the same kind of themes don't happen again. And we have also introduced customer satisfaction surveys at each significant step in the statutory assessment process, so that we can continue to learn and make improvements to services to prevent complaints coming in. Would that be helpful?
I think that would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I would welcome that. Thank you very much.
I think that gives us time to go through it, and if we have any questions from that, we can go back to you. Thank you. Mr. Sheehan.
Yeah, that was going to be my first question, or second question perhaps, and I'll be happy to receive that. And of course, Paula, you've now got the opportunity to go into some detail on that for the written report, so thank you very much. Also, Paula, you may have an update for us on paragraph 54.14. There was due to be a DFE monitoring meeting update last Friday, but apparently this week, but it happened last week. You're going to tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, we did meet with the DFE for our first formal monitoring meeting last Friday. It was brought forward, but unfortunately it was short notice, so we weren't able to update that in the report you have in front of you. So just by way of a little bit of context, we did write up the written statement of action, and we submitted that in October, and it was reported to be fit for purpose immediately, and we did get some very good feedback on the structure and content of the report. We did have that first formal monitoring meeting on the 15th, and there was very good feedback in terms of the progress we've made, and it was described as an impressive progress report, conveying a real sense of progress within a succinct style. It provided a good picture of overall progress and evidence of progress across both of the written statement of action areas, and already 31% of the actions are completed or embedded or on track, with 49% of the actions in progress, given an overall total of 80% of actions showing significant and good progress, as well as evidence of impact on improvements. So that was our kind of verbal feedback at the meeting.
Thank you. Is that? I think that's quite a full answer, Sean.
It's encouraging. When's our deadline for getting it 100% completed?
Before we are, there will be a revisit, which is usually 18 months following your inspection, but there has been an overall delay in the process for obvious reasons. There was several month delay in the publication of our letter, and then we had an extended period to produce our written statement of action. Therefore, the first meeting was delayed. So we're probably looking, they would want to see at that revisit, not necessarily 100% of everything being completed, but certainly the majority. So we're very confident that we will be in that position at that point of the revisit.
I wasn't trying to put on any pressure there. I just thought your first answer was good enough to deserve a good supplementary question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have no more hands, so we'll move on to agenda item 11, which we've retitled COVID-19 Update, which I'm sure Jane has got to go and do at the briefing as well. So starting for the leader and chief, normal Tuesday afternoon briefing. Jane, do you want to do the same again? We're presuming everybody has read it in detail, and have they any points they would like raised?
Yes, if that's okay, Chair.
I have no hands showing at the moment. So, oh, Mr. Sheehan. Sean, you're still muted. You're still muted, Sean.
Yeah, I know. It's just manual dexterity is not what it was. But anyway, I'll let you have my question. We looked at this in the briefing, and we know that the impact on children has been one of the hidden effects of the COVID virus, as far as the public are concerned. It's quite obvious to us because we know what's been going on. But I'm concerned that there will be impacts of COVID that are not yet fully clear to even us. And I hope we can put our capacity for preventive work into good use in identifying early and responding effectively to these problems as they emerge, and that we do actually have a robust response to COVID up our sleeves, and we start to anticipate what we might have to be dealing with.
Yeah, Chair, if I may, I think there's two things. One is that there is the continued focus on what and how we deliver through COVID, and certainly whilst we are in lockdown, children aren't in school, I think there's a continued need to focus on what and how we deliver. We haven't stood things down in the department. We have continued to deliver services. I think the second point you make around the impact of COVID on children is not fully known, but you can see from the report we have seen some increase in certainly the complexity of cases and child protection cases coming through. I'm confident that the way in which we're structured in the department around how we identify children, how we work with our partners, means that we'll continue to be able to deliver and support children and understand better the impact of COVID as we go through as well.
Yeah, and I hope we do focus particularly on vulnerable and children from deprived families as well, because they've been hardest hit.
Thank you. And I think also it's beholden on all of us councillors as well to be able to identify and to help where possible and point people in the right direction. This is going to be a long-term thing. We may not know for 1 or 2 years or 3 years the long-term effect, and it's all children. I appreciate, Sean, there is a problem with deprived children, but there is also in other children who are undergoing really quite severe problems with maybe 2, 3, 4 people all trying to work at home, including the children of different levels. It's all been a big learning curve, but thank you very much. I have no more hands, and we go to the final report, which is, Ted. Mr. Parton very quickly came in, now he's gone out again.
No, Chair, it's to do with the last item.
Right, quite quickly, Ted.
Okay, right. A lot of, for example, on page 72 and 73, Jane, talks about where you're doing practical activities with children. And
sorry, Ted, that's part of the annual report.
Right, yeah.
The next item,
Yeah, I know. That's what I meant. I meant that the question was for the next item.
Oh, right. It's to do with the report that's already published or in. Right.
Chair, can I suggest again we don't present the report, but we'll take questions for the
yes. So
adoption
Mr.
report.
Parton, you have a question regarding the annual report on adoption.
That's correct. Yeah. A very quick one. In terms of the page 72 and 73, when you read it, there's a lot of practical action in working with children, including, quite a lot of outdoor activities. How much of it is still ongoing almost as we speak now, given the national lockdown?
Okay. If I answer that, there are officers from the service that are in that can give detail if members of I'm mindful of the time. The report obviously, as you know, outlines our performance up to 2019. The report that you receive next year will actually outline what we're doing now. What I can say is that we have had to change a lot of our activity where at all possible to virtual contact. But I can also say that from observing this practice, where we've been able to do it safely, we have continued with a level of face-to-face contact that would be safe and appropriate for those children. So some of the bigger activities we've had to develop and redefine in line with COVID, but we have continued for individual children where their circumstances require it to offer that contact and activities for them.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
A very quick question. I don't expect the answer this afternoon, but if somebody could let me know, the bottom of page 73 and 74, the table, I just wondered what the figures would be if you removed the 5 children that you mentioned that seem to have distorted all the figures and make it a hell of a lot worse than our near neighbours. So is it possible to see, I don't know how many children we're dealing with, but if you take those 5 out, can we see some figures there, please?
Yes, we can most definitely do that. Yeah.
That's
what I can say is the individual outcomes for those children, although the figure against that neighbours wasn't good, the individual outcomes for those 5 children have actually been very positive.
Okay, thank you. I think people are trying to join all sorts of meetings now. I keep getting notices flashing up at me. So thank you very much. Been a long meeting, but very productive, and I thank you all for your attention. Our next meeting is on the 9th of March at 2 o'clock. If we're still doing COVID briefings, we may have to look at the timing again, because I know for the officers and all of us as well, it seems it's gone on without a break for quite a long time today.
Isn't the next meeting on a Monday, Hilary?
You are obviously looking at diaries. Well done, Jen.
No, they should be on a Tuesday.
No, it's on a Tuesday.
Is it?
Adults and families are on a Monday. Children and families today. So adults and communities on Monday. So I'll leave that in the capable hands of Gemma, because if we're still having Tuesday afternoon briefings, it's just too tight for everybody.
Yeah, we can look at that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.